Railroads have been part of Pennsylvania life for nearly 2 centuries, moving goods and passengers, providing thousands of jobs, and playing a major role in shaping the environmental, social, and economic history of the Commonwealth. Today, Pennsylvania railroads are still adding fuel to the state's economic engine and transporting passengers. But the heritage of these iron giants and the companies that ran them lives right here. Hello, welcome to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. My name's Henry. My family has worked the railroads of Pennsylvania for generations. Years ago, I worked the Reading line as, well, you guessed it, a conductor. These days, I help out at this fine museum. What we do here is to tell the fascinating stories of Pennsylvania's railroading heritage and preserve a world-class collection of locomotives, railroad cars, and artifacts. But in order to really appreciate what we have here, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. The story of Pennsylvania's railroads began in the early 1800s, when travel across the state was limited to walking, riding on horseback, or by horse-drawn wagon or stagecoaches. Except for a few well-kept toll roads, most roads were unmarked and poorly maintained. In 1825, it took 25 days to ship a wagon load of goods from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh in the dry season, at a cost of $100 per ton. Realizing the need to improve the transportation of people and goods across the state, the Pennsylvania legislature approved funding to construct a statewide transportation system across the Commonwealth's interior, combining inclined plains, canals, rivers, and railroads. They called it the Main Line of Public Works. When completed in 1834, the Main Line cut travel times across the state to 7 days and lowered prices by more than half. Despite the improvements, the system was complicated, expensive, and couldn't operate year-round. The citizens and businessmen of Pennsylvania demanded a better solution. System operators quickly realized the railroad sections were faster, more reliable, and easier to maintain than the canals. By the late 1840s, a railroad connecting Philadelphia with the state capital at Harrisburg was completed. At the same time, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company developed plans to build a 200-mile railroad from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh. When completed in 1854, it was considered a civil engineering marvel of the 19th century. It included scores of bridges, millions of tons of earth fills. It cut through miles of hills and rock. It also included the now famous horseshoe curve that enabled the railroad to gradually ascend and descend the slopes of the Allegheny mountain range. The new track cut passenger travel time from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh to 13 hours and cut the cost of shipping goods across the state to $6 per ton. By the Civil War, several companies built railroads connecting many Pennsylvania towns and cities. These included the Philadelphia and Reading, the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western, Erie, the Delaware and Hudson, and the Cumberland Valley Railroads. They delivered raw materials such as coal, iron ore, oil, lumber, and cotton to factories, and carried away steel, machinery, cloth, and other finished products. The farming industry also benefited from the Commonwealth's growing rail network by quickly and economically moving livestock, milk, grain, and produce from the farmlands to the cities. In addition, these railroads played a crucial role in transporting troops and supplies during the Civil War, and would prove their worth as a critical transportation system in future 19th and 20th century conflicts. After the war, the state's railroads continued to expand, and by 1915 it had grown to nearly 12,000 miles of track, ranking it third in the nation for track mileage. A huge workforce was required to maintain the track and equipment. By 1910, 1 in every 5 Pennsylvanians worked for a railroad or a railroad-related industry. Often the railroads were one of the few places where minorities could find employment in relatively good positions with elevated status. During this golden age, railroads became part of the American landscape, serving as a catalyst for progress and change. But as automobile and airline travel became more popular, passenger rail travel began to decline. And the Great Depression of the 1930s brought a decline in freight traffic. Except for a brief rebound during the Second World War, passenger and freight traffic continued to dwindle, forcing many Pennsylvania railroads into bankruptcy by the early 1960s. Faced with falling revenues and a weakened industrial base, railroads began abandoning or downsizing branch and main lines across the Commonwealth throughout the 1970s. When the railroads could no longer provide basic services, the federal government assumed control of all passenger service, including Pennsylvania's, with the creation of Amtrak in 1971. 7 of Pennsylvania's ailing freight railroads were brought together under Conrail in 1976. Through the introduction of new technologies and other factors, Conrail became one of the best railroad success stories of the 20th century. Today, Pennsylvania still leads the nation with a strong rail network. Its manufacturing facilities supply the industry with locomotives, freight cars, rails, and signals nationwide. The Commonwealth also continues its commitment to passenger rail service between metropolitan areas by improving its standard commuter lines and adding a high-speed rail line. Well, there you have it. That's some story, isn't it? But hold the train. It doesn't stop here. This museum has a little history of its own. In its heyday, the Pennsylvania Railroad was one of the world's largest corporations and was known as the standard railroad of the world. As early as the late 1800s, the railroad began to set aside historic engines and cars as they were retired and displayed them at World's Fairs. By the late 1960s, the collection had grown to 26 pieces, including one of the largest collection of steam engines from a single railroad in the U.S. Facing financial difficulties, Penn Central, the successor to the Pennsylvania Railroad, donated its holdings to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who had expressed an interest in building a new museum dedicated to the history of railroads. By 1969, the collection was moved to Strasburg, Lancaster County, where the Strasburg Railroad was operating historic steam trains, and the Amish culture and farmland were already a major tourist attraction. In 1972, construction began on the first building designed and built as a railroad museum in North America. The Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania opened its doors April 22, 1975, and was visited by more than 250,000 people in its first year. Since then, it has more than doubled in size, with a major addition in 1995 that allows for the display of whole trains inside. It also added this restoration shop where work on the museum's collection can be performed. Of course, safety regulations forbid visitors in here, but you can see what they're doing on closed-circuit television. The collection of locomotives and cars represents 18 railroad companies and has grown to more than 110 pieces. It includes passenger and freight steam engines, electric locomotives, and diesel-electric engines. Passenger cars range from the plain and simple to the accommodating to the elegant. An exceptional collection of freight cars represents nearly every size and shape imaginable. Exploring the locomotives and cars is easy. Information on each vehicle can be found on the large label panels, and museum staff are available to answer any questions. Remember to check the board at the ticket desk for special tours, programs, and times. This 5.5-acre outdoor rail yard includes locomotives and cars in varying degrees of restoration. It also includes this operating 1928 Reading Company turntable. Now you can arrange for tours of the yard, weather and staff permitting. Okay, let's roll. In addition to trains, the museum also boasts a collection of smaller artifacts such as dining car china, uniforms, lanterns, tools, signals, and other objects that were made or used by Pennsylvania railroads. This second floor gallery is used to display an extensive collection of prints, maps, paintings, and photographs. It's also used for themed exhibitions on railroad history. The museum also houses one of the finest railroad archives in the East, with more than 150,000 photographic images, 3,000 cubic feet of railroad company records, and a 10,000-volume library. Both the archival collections and the library are available by appointment only. The Stewart Junction Railroad Education Center contains several interactive layouts where students and families and scouts can operate 9 different model train layouts and perform different jobs just like they were on a real railroad. And finally, before you leave, don't forget to visit the museum shop, where you can purchase train-related items like books, and photos, games, puzzles, postcards, and memorabilia. Time really flies when you're talking trains, and speaking of trains, this one has got to get rolling. So thanks for stopping by. We hope you enjoy your visit to the museum as you relive the history of Pennsylvania's railroads and make a few great memories of your own. All aboard!